All right, we're now in the 11 o'clock hour, the 5 p.m. Eastern Central European Time hour, and the 8 a.m. Pacific hour. This is the sweet spot of today's conference. We have a wonderful security panel lined up for everybody, and we're really, really excited. You can join us in the Futureproof IT 2020 Slack, or submit your questions also via Zoom. First up, I'm going to introduce our moderator today. That is Rob Pegararo, a tech journalist with imprints in USA Today, Yahoo News, and elsewhere, formerly the consumer tech reporter for the Washington Post, and a good friend of mine. So, Rob, I'm definitely looking forward to getting back to baseball games with you, but for now, I will settle for an awesome conference. And thanks for joining us as our moderator today.
You got it. Hey, everybody. Thanks for showing up. Yeah, so I've been writing about security issues for such a long time that you can look up a Windows XP review I did in 2001 in which the word security doesn't appear at all. We've all learned a lot since then. And in this case, over the last few months, we've been running an interesting global distributed experiment. What happens when you send everyone to work outside their offices on possibly untrusted endpoints? Will bad things happen or not? Our panel is going to get into what we've learned so far, what we should have been doing, what we should be doing. We've got with us Amélie Erin Koran from Splunk, Shrav Mehta from Secureframe, and Yael Grauer and other tech journalists. Come on board, everybody, and please introduce yourselves.
Hi, my name is Amélie Koran. I am the Senior Technology Advocate for Splunk. Prior to this, I spent about a decade in the federal government doing all manner of things, primarily security, but most recently as a Chief Technology Officer for HHS Health and Human Services. So, but glad to be here. Mainly a security person, but you know, having a chance to do executive management also kind of helps add a little color to it all.
And Shrav, introduce yourself.
Hey, I'm Shrav. I'm the CEO of Secureframe. We make it super easy for people to get SOC 2 reports or ISO 27001 certifications, and you know, been working in IT for quite a while, so hopefully we can add to the conversation here.
I'm Yael. I'm a tech journalist. I cover digital freedom, privacy, and security, and I do a little bit of investigative reporting, and it always kind of seems to you know, go back to cybersecurity.
So yeah, so as I said, we're in this strange time where we've set out on an experiment none of us are planning on conducting at the start of the year. And usually you would think if you run a massively distributed real-world test of deploying systems with inadequate prep over embedded endpoints, bad things are going to happen. But have they? Has all this exposed a lot of vulnerabilities in our distributed work systems, or have we gotten lucky, or have things that actually worked maybe better than we would have hoped in January? And y'all can jump on this in whatever order you want.
I think, you know, as you've possibly have not seen in the news, I think a lot of organizations have managed to dodge those bullets. I wouldn't say all of them were prepared. It's more or less the challenge with this is it's a cross between a disaster recovery and continuity of operations plan and some stuff that may have been already strategically planned. I think the big challenges for a lot of folks have been exercising contracts and partnerships that they've had in place to kind of either increase capacity or get a couple of extra layers of technology and policy on top of it, mainly enhanced work from home policies regarding secure computing, extending out to cloud services and so forth to provide more flexible authentication that may have been inside a network before prior to this incident.
Yael, have you come across any security catastrophes that we should have read about from you, or we'll be reading about from you?
I don't know if I'm writing about this, but I did read a report by Google's threat and analysis group, and it was about state-sponsored attacks that were kind of using the pandemic as a cover for espionage. And I've been reading about like increased phishing attacks, but it's hard to say if that's more because people are working from home or like attackers have more time on their hand, or if they're just kind of opportunistic and shifting their strategies, which is kind of likely.
Hackers, they're bored at home. They're just like us. Shrav, has the security apocalypse not happened in this case?
Yeah, I mean, in the tech industry, I think many people were already prepared. Like, if you work at a company like Google or Facebook or Amazon, you're already given a laptop with all this kind of stuff set up. So the transition to work from home, I don't think was as difficult for some of these larger tech companies. I think it's been more difficult for some of these more traditional companies like banks that aren't really set up for work from home. And I think that's where, I've seen, companies struggle a little bit, but, for the most part, I think we've handled this quite well given the circumstances.
So yeah, let's talk about this on a sector by sector basis. Obviously, there are some industries where there's compliance dictates, or there's been a tradition of working from home if you want to, and others where that hasn't been the case. I know around DC, remote education has been really problematic. Readers of the Washington Post have been probably horrified to learn how badly the Fairfax County Public Schools approached this. They had a blackboard set up where they had not installed about a year or so worth of updates. I hear that's bad for security, and then did not have adequate training, and everything that you could think would go wrong with trolls and griefers and a remote education system did go wrong. So, I guess outside of the large tech companies like Google and Facebook, where you'd expect them to have this down cold, who's been doing this well, who has struggled in looking at it either by size of the company or the industry sector? Amélie.
Okay. Yeah, that's actually kind of an interesting challenge. What you have been doing in the past needs to, well, it's either reflective of what happens now, as you mentioned, the lack of a patching methodology, or at least basically a practice kind of like, muscle memory, will definitely hinder you. So trying to rush through all that, beyond the fact that you're applying security patches, you've got to do end-to-end system testing, making sure the integrations all work. So you're literally compounding that. So does that make that a challenge? As you mentioned, there's, things that have been shifted, educational institutions, ones that are not traditionally a remote organization, those you're seeing break, or you're seeing reprioritization of workers. So not all work is considered critical. So you're going to see a focus on that. And those are, you mentioned about security, those tend to be those high targets for phishing, because that the CEO or the vice presidents or whatever are going to be working from home. They're more likely to not have those layered security on there. But the challenge is that as you switch more into remote work, you don't have that managed environment, particularly unless you've been issued a laptop. So you're now dealing with people's home computers, and you're trying to institute a level of hygiene that they are not traditionally familiar with as well. And I think that actually is the biggest challenge right now, because you talk to like McAfee or Symantec or any of these companies here, they've got major buy orders from some of these companies and are distributing licenses willy-nilly. So there's an increased cost and so forth as well. I haven't seen any real reports where, they've beyond, particularly threat hunters and whatnot, coming up with some of the APTs and whatnot of what they've been targeting during this period of time. If they've had any issues where, there was a reactive purchase or an acquisition of services, post the Corona quarantines.
Shrav, your perspective on that?
I mean, yeah, yeah. I mean, I think you had a good answer to that. Where some industries have been like very prepared, or it's hard, very prepared on a relative basis. With companies that have already been issuing laptops to work from home, this is much easier. But in some cases, people are using their own home computers, and I think that's a lot more difficult to work with. Now, I think the state of modern IT has made this somewhat easier. Like, accessing email and stuff securely from home is not as difficult as it has been in the past. So, if you're using web applications that are encrypted with HTTPS, you're not running into these problems as much. But, it's definitely not the same as having a company equipment that's, properly protected. So I think organizations are, having trouble making these changes. And it's especially hard, to send, a whole set of new laptops to someone, help them configure it and do all this, all remotely. So, IT teams have just had a lot more work to do. But, I think we've made a lot of great progress. I think organizations that thought, that they would never be able to work from home, are making those changes, because they have to. And it's, creating a new, generation of like digital work that, I think we'll be seeing a lot more of.
So let's talk about, people using their own personally purchased devices, because this interests me in the sense that, when I worked in an office, without dissing the Washington Post in particular, newspapers are not at the cutting edge of technology in general. If you want to run the latest version of Windows or a really great CMS, you probably don't want to go to a print newspaper. And whereas at home, you can install the updates as they come out in Mac OS and Windows and Android and iOS. They should be pretty much automatic. So are we seeing in any cases where the IT department that's traditionally held off on installing updates until they can test every patch sort of had to like trust Microsoft, trust Apple, trust Google, and perhaps seeing some benefit of just install your updates the second they come out and just don't even think about it?
Well, I agree that a lot of environments are just terrible. Like I remember when I was in grad school and we were all supposed to upload videos to a single folder with a shared password that was the same password as 5 years
That
prior.
sounds great.
And like somebody could just delete all the videos there and they would miss the deadline and get a 0. So it was terrible. And then also just like I had a non-cloud based password vault for certain things that's on my laptop. So I had to like write those letters. I don't know, there was just some stuff that was easier to do. But what I have noticed though, that even places that are set up for people to work remotely, they're not set up for everybody to work remotely a lot of times. Like there might be an air gap in the office that you have to actually have physical access to. So not being able to at least have one person there to get that information has been kind of problematic, and trying to kind of work around that. So I think it's kind of a trade-off, and it depends probably on the organization.
Yeah, I guess the flip side of prompt updates is maybe they do break some office application or system, some legacy component that the work IT people know needs to be accommodated. So I guess that'd be my question to Shrav and Amélie is, are we having issues in the other direction where the price of security is breaking old systems that were allowed to stay unbroken in a corporate managed IT context?
Shrav, you want to go first, or?
I'll let you take it.
Yeah, one of the biggest things is, and I was going to tie on to Yael's comment there, organizations that weren't necessarily born digital, ones that consumed, X as their infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, they've had an easier time because they've pushed security to those vendors. You're not having to worry about a password vault, or you're not having to necessarily worry about updates for applications. Microsoft Office 365, you can use most of the features that most people use in the web version. So having a thick client or even an entire station that you have to provide a user, a laptop or any type of desktop, has become less and less relevant. Therefore, worrying about system level patches becomes less of a worry. However, as you mentioned about the rigor of having to patch and allowing certain machines to legacy machines to basically kind of hang out a lot longer. This goes into one of those cases of, it's a little bit of a Pareto rule. When you look at kind of system maintenance, you have 80% of the stuff that takes a patch, not a problem, very easy. That 20% is where you spend a lot of your time on there. Now with this, the shelter in place there, you're hopefully, good organizations, have that 80% nailed, but that 20% is probably where most of that headache occurs. Then you start to think about system criticality. As I mentioned before, certain sectors and whatnot, power plants, manufacturing and so forth, that's something you just can't basically push to the cloud, or have somebody take a laptop home that has allows you to control that. So those ones I think are going to be the biggest challenge. I don't think there's the quick fix for that. If you haven't gotten into a whole patch test release regimen, this is now just a bigger headache on you. And, you know, with the whole aspect of people working remotely, you're reducing risk by, you know, if the people need to be in the office, you only have like 5 people in the office rather than 100. So it's, you know, again, gets back into an argument of risk management more than just general operations.
Yeah, to add on to that, I think it really is best practice these days to, keep up to date with, all the latest software updates. And, what many larger IT organizations do is, they actually, change the update servers. So, even when employees like take these laptops home, they're looking at these update servers, which IT teams are still reviewing. Now, not every, company is large enough to have a team to review all these updates. And I think in those cases, like, the best practice is always to keep these machines up to date, always make sure your employees are installing OS updates. And, if you do that and keep up to date, it becomes much easier. I think, it's the organizations that haven't done that, that are going to struggle a little bit right now. But, for the most part, there are ways to, maintain that same level of security that, you have in the office at home, especially for these larger companies that, already have like, update servers of their own and these kind of procedures and policies in place.
I think the other advantage too, Shrav mentioned too, is like you put all your bad apples in one basket. Now that everyone's pushed remote, the systems that are critical, obviously who's accessing them at that point. Like if they're VPNing in, those are the only ones you really have to worry about. You don't have to worry about the rest of the noise, typically on a LAN or whatever. So it does give you a chance to kind of maybe fortify and monitor a little bit better. But again, if your organization doesn't kind of have that as part of their culture, their patch maintenance cycles and so forth, it is a challenge.
Another thing I want to discuss is the risks of social engineering. Usually if you get an email from somebody in your organization, you can always walk over to their desk in theory and say, did you send this? But when no one can walk over to anyone else's desk, all the communication is remote and everything, it is that much harder to verify that, yeah, this message really came from this person. How are we going to adapt to that? And how do we, make sure that people are not that much more vulnerable to one phishing scam or another, just because the usual reality check of just physically seeing the person is no longer an option? And have we seen any successful exploits, taking advantage of the fact that, yeah, no one can see anyone else anymore, so you have to trust that the email is really from this person?
Well, I've never actually walked down to anybody's desk when I've got a phishing suspect. Most organizations will have, if you suspect this, send it to an email address, the entire body. So it depends on, the maturity of the organization. The other aspect is I think probably one of the first things when people started modernizing their IT infrastructures have been cloud-based email, whether it be Office 365, Google Cloud, whomever they may choose. Most of those protections are there. I think the angle for phishing has gotten a little bit, less advantageous. I think the biggest challenges now is with kind of the commingled work from home and corporate stuff. If you have a unified inbox or whatever, that potential aspect of clicking on something that you may think is actually from your work, but it's actually your personal account, but you have them in the same stack. That's probably the bigger challenge because you potentially have that commingling, or you're just, you don't separate work and personal on your desktop. So that's probably your biggest risk factor at this point.
Like autocomplete leading somebody astray?
Come again?
Autocomplete. I was thinking that there was someone connected with the White House where the autocomplete led them to send an email they'd meant to send to someone. They were doing something not altogether straightforward with to a government investigator whose name also began with Z. Yeah. Shrav, your thoughts on social engineering risks in this context of?
Yeah, so I mean, like, a good best practice for any organization, especially in times like these, is to, have your whole organization to go through security awareness training. And a good security awareness training program will have, a whole section on, phishing emails. I think these days, like Google's, spam filters are actually like really good, and they do catch the majority of, the phishing emails that do come in. Now, I think, this gets more challenging when you have an organization that's remote and you have no way to verify, but, people are using services like Slack and Zoom, and, if you could see someone's face, I think, and, hear them, say, hey, this wasn't me, or this was me, that's, just as good a verification. I think, there, there are, of course, ways for people to impersonate themselves in like Zoom. But, if you could turn on the webcam and show that, I think, that's pretty good. But also it goes into like another area, like two-factor authentication. Like, every organization should require two-factor authentication for every single vendor that they have that supports it, especially for critical services like, G Suite or Office 365. And the whole idea with two-factor authentication is, you have like a token or a device that's on you at all times, that you need to log in with. So, if someone's sending a phishing email, becomes that much harder. Because the employee, one, has to log in, so maybe the password is taken, but they still have to have that two-factor auth token, which should be with that person. It can sometimes be a key fob, or a USB-C or USB key that you enter into your computer, and that's like kind of another way to make sure that it's really your employees or the intended person sending these emails, because they're the only ones that should have access to it or the ability to log in. So I think there are ways to like manage this, and it's not going to be as big a problem if you put, the right policies and procedures and give employees the right training.
I would definitely hope that everyone watching this does have two-step verification enabled for any account of value. But I do wonder about this. I think it was only 2 weeks ago, LastPass commissioned a survey of password hygiene, which on the one hand found over 50% of people admitted to reusing passwords, but then also said more than 50% said they used multi-factor authentication on some accounts. And I had to wonder, do these people actually not understand that by multi-factor authentication, we don't mean security questions or, password reset via trusted email, but actual one-time codes. What's your take on how many, of these critical work email accounts are actually secured that way these days? In any context, government, Fortune 500, I suspect it's not 50%, but I've been looking for a lot. Yael, have you seen any good numbers on deployment of 2FA?
I have not. I know that there are some services that require it though, and pretty much every work, like corporate, like when I've been given corporate email addresses, when they have some kind of two-factor, usually like email based, but Shrav was mentioning security keys. I think that even with security training, you have these like sort of lapses in judgment. So if you have your multi-factor authentication, that's a security key instead of Authy or email or SMS based. I think it kind of it won't authenticate to sites that are fake, which is something you might miss no matter how much training you have. And I don't think a lot of companies are requiring that. And I don't even know that I just did a review of security keys, and I was kind of surprised at how clunky they were for some services, and especially on iOS. And I feel like the industry, maybe they'll be better, but I don't think we're quite ready to say only use keys at this point. But yeah, I think whenever possible, it can really help.
Yeah, the soft ones are actually quite good, Okta and Duo and whatnot. The challenge was, I've been in a couple organizations where we've tried integration. Some it's just been overly tough for people. Sometimes it's also analysis through paralysis. They want to find the best, especially in government. There's a lot of restrictions on if a particular cloud service can be used, then trying to do the integrations with that. So, by the time you get a product delivered, it's way beyond, when you're ready for it. I think we looked at things like Ping, Duo, so forth. And, our remote access was still literally, you had to have a CAC card, a smart card to plug in to have your multi-factor. Granted, it is better than nothing, but it did, most of that did not work on mobile devices, which is typically where a lot of organizations are going. And having a card dongle on the end of a tablet or whatever definitely is not aesthetically pleasing, but it's also just something that wasn't originally designed into what was originally a consumer product.
Is some of that paralysis by analysis due to every time I talk about security issues like two-step verification or password managers in a consumer context, somebody gets around to these movie thriller plot threat models. Well, biometric authentication, what if someone gets your fingerprint? Well, are you the subject of a nation state intelligence service? Are you of interest to one? Then you might not want to use it. If you're not, who is actually trying to get your data?
I think threat modeling is probably one of the most important things an organization can do. You know, having worked for critical infrastructure in the power industry and whatnot, you know, back in the early days, it was more or less, we have enough security that it's hard enough, so they'll just move on to the next power company. But then again, too, you have your own personal threat model, as you mentioned too. Unless you're, you know, if you're a government employee, there's a certain level, but then, you know, are you working with national security data and so forth? You know, you have to adjust your threat model based upon the type of work and environments that you work in. An organization can only do so much for you. The rest of it's just general behavior and kind of the culture there. You know, when I've switched between public and private sectors, it's been interesting to kind of realize that sometimes certain aspects of the private sector are performing a lot more security, I would say culture or theater, but just general practices than you would say in the public sector. Having worked for Disney, you know, they were protecting intellectual property. The idea of walking to the studio, they had a social media policy. There, you know, there's all these things threat to their stock and trade, had policies wrapped around it versus, you know, walking the government and it's like, just show your badge, make sure you don't share your password. If you have two-factor authentication, use that. That was kind of where it ended. You know, there was just general like, you know, retribution. Like if you spilled data, you had to go file an incident report and so forth. So that was just kind of the fear of paperwork is what kept some people doing better security practices.
So let's talk about another case of threat models intersecting reality in interesting ways, which is the security of your internet connection. If you're on a home broadband connection, presumably it's secure, but you might be using Wi-Fi from somewhere else. You might be borrowing the neighbor's Wi-Fi because your own connection has crapped out. And a common remedy for that is use a VPN service. But I know, Yael, you've looked at these for Wirecutter, and the security of them is all over the map. Are you seeing any consensus here on where VPN should fit in, should be used, or is not worth the trouble for remote work?
Yeah, I actually feel like VPNs are kind of not as necessary as they used to be because everything is moving to HTTPS. So I don't recommend it nearly as often as I used to. And yeah, a lot of VPNs are really awful. And when I was reviewing them for Wirecutter, we were trying to figure out like what are the basic things we want VPNs to have. And I was like, they should have an audit and a transparency report. And even that like knocks out like 95% of them, or just being like transparent about your ownership and having your marketing copy be
right. You'd think that would be who is actually getting the money you're paying to the VPN service?
Right. Like
the data point.
Yeah, no, the money part too, but also it's like they're accessing all of your web data. So who do you trust more than your ISP to see every single page that you visit? And is it really like some company you don't even know who the owners are? And there's been a lot of kind of instances of kind of sketchy companies. And I think a lot of the reporting on VPNs has been weird because they're like, oh, you need a no logs VPN that's based in Belize and only accepts cryptocurrency, which doesn't really fit most people's threat models.
We've reached the Bitcoin stage of the panel, everybody. Cross that off your buzzword bingo square.
Yeah, so I don't know. I don't think it's nearly as important as it used to be.
And that too is, and the kind of the corporate world is you're looking, you know, using this from home. The idea is too is, you know, as you move more to cloud services and whatnot, the reasoning or the level of connecting back to your fortress at work, it's an on-demand VPN. So, you know, sometimes the only time I connect at Splunk back to is for administrative password resets. For our AD environment and some of our bug tracking and stuff that's literally highly protected. It's the intellectual property. Everything else is a cloud service. Conversely, you know, when I was working for the government, everything was over VPN. The VPN sucked. It was slow. When I was doing IT for Mandiant, The challenge is they were doing development and they were pushing ISO images, CD-ROM and DVD images over the VPN and wondering why the performance was so poor. And you had, packet mangling from Comcast that was slowing things down. Plus you had the overhead of the VPN. So you need to understand, like, if you have a VPN policy, kind of instantiate what are the reasons why you're using that, and even limit access potentially. If you have a budget person that, is using a cloud service, they don't need, the VPN service back into the corporation. They can just use the cloud service versus, an IT administrator, they would be the ones that would be issued. And it's a cost thing too. It's, having an RSA environment for multi-factor authentication. If you're managing that yourself, that's, a couple $1,000s for the server and, a box of tokens.
Yeah, I mean, I thought I had a little bit of a hot take, but I think, I agree with, a lot of what you said, what you all are saying. I don't think public Wi-Fi networks are as bad as they are made out to be. I think it's because of like the change in environment we've had. When you're visiting HTTPS encrypted sites, your connection is for the most part secure. I think this was more of a problem when you were accessing HTTP sites, and essentially anyone on your network, especially like a public network, could see what you're doing, and it's not very hard. But now Chrome alerts you when you're visiting an HTTP site. And I think people are more aware of this. So as long as, you're accessing HTTPS sites, you're in a pretty good place. I do think that, VPNs, if used and configured correctly, can be a very valuable tool. With VPNs, it is about like the service you use. You want to make sure you use someone reputable, someone that you trust with your data and, network security. Oftentimes what I see people do is they, spin up an AWS instance that they use for like VPN connections. And, you can scale this up and down to manage your traffic and make sure, that you're not having any bandwidth or latency issues. I think with that, you have a really good layer of protection. And I think, best practices, especially for engineers and, production environments, is that you're only accessing, your AWS, account or Google Cloud account through a VPN, and, it's only accessible through that means. What a lot of people do is they configure VPN services that require two-factor authentication, and that again is another layer of security before accessing these like production level services. Now, Cloudflare also recently came out with a new tool. I forget exactly what it's called, but you can essentially require that it basically puts a layer on top of your dashboard so that you can only access it through a VPN or like a secured service. Companies are primarily using services like this for internal dashboards, for things that, they really want people to have a secured connection. And I do think, while, in some cases it can be considered security theater, it is still like another level of security that, if you can put it in place, I'd highly recommend organizations do that. Just make sure you choose a VPN provider that you trust or roll out your own.
I have to admit, I have not. I have a paid for VPN subscription, and I haven't used it for a while because my big use cases for it lately have been going to hacker conferences, being in China, or reading GDPR incompliant U.S. newspapers in the European Union. And none of those things are on my calendar right now or anytime soon, actually.
Yeah, and actually to, kind of add on to what I was saying earlier, public networks aren't necessarily bad, if you're using HTTP sites, but what is bad is the people looking over your shoulder. That is actually the bigger problem. So, I hear about, people who end up on airplanes and, there's a reporter in a seat behind him and they can see all this financial data on the computer. And I see that as actually like a more common
I have not actually done that.
issue.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, not saying anyone here is doing that, of course, but whether it's a reporter or someone else, if they can see your screen, that's probably a bigger security breach, or that's probably more likely than getting truly hacked on a public network or something like that.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, and you can buy a privacy screen, obviously, for that. But I do use the VPN when I'm trying to access sites that I don't necessarily want traced back to my IP. Like if I'm just in the beginning of an investigation or whatever, and like obviously you can use things like this web browser, but it breaks things. So I do think there's like reasons to use it. It's just yeah, like everybody keeps saying, it's just not as like now all these sites are moving to HTTPS and the risk is pretty low. So it's not, I don't think everybody needs one.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the app we're using right now, Zoom. This is an app and a company that has really had to grow up rapidly and unexpectedly. And at the start of the year, I think most of us would say their security practices were not great. Yeah, your reporting has come up, established some things they needed to fix. Let's talk about what this company, what Zoom should have done before the dark times set in, and what it has done, how you grade its responses so far, and if there's anything else on its to-do list you'd like to see them doing, since for better or worse, this seems to be the video chat we're all using. It actually works on all our devices, unlike FaceTime. It has not changed its branding or messaging strategy in the last 3 weeks, unlike whatever Google Meet Hangouts chat is this month. You know, it's here, it works, people are using it, and at least it's getting more secure, right?
Yeah, so as far as what it should have done in the before times, I don't think there's ever any excuse for lying or having misleading marketing copy. And I think like Zoom got a lot of negative press for not being end-to-end encrypted, even though all of its competitors, or very few of its competitors, are end-to-end encrypted. And so I feel like if they had just not had misleading marketing copy.
Green badge at the top left corner.
Yeah, exactly. Like, don't say end-to-end encrypted if it's not. And like, I think Cisco WebEx has actually done a really good job with like threat modeling and testing and public disclosure of vulnerabilities, and they have a really good white paper that makes sense and explains their end-to-end encryption in a way that people can actually understand. So I think that that's really, really cool. And I think like one of the really difficult things that Zoom should have done, but everybody should in retrospect, is like, you know, bake the idea of abuse into design, like assume negative intent, like what could go wrong. And I think that's true about every social media platform and every video platform. Like, how do you, like, I feel like they didn't take the some of the ways that people could have used it seriously until it started kind of happening on a more massive scale and just getting a lot of really bad publicity. Yeah, but I do think they have done a lot of things right in taking responsibility and just changing misleading copy instead of digging in their heels and you know, hiring really great people who can help with security. But I am concerned that like some of the features that they're implementing will only be used for like paid subscribers. And I like personally, I like to use, like, I want to be able to use a brand that I know is encrypted every time I use it, not depending on like who set up the meeting or whatnot.
Yeah, I think you mentioned the challenges too. Was it the NSA or the DoD had released a sheet of, you know, kind of the general analysis of all the major platforms, and I think the only one that kind of top scored was actually Signal. But you know, unless you're somebody in the security community, you know, you're really not you're not really up to speed on that. You may have heard it mentioned in the news because, you know, a certain appointee had used it for communications and whatnot. But the other challenges too, and I think the reason why you have the uptake in Zoom and on a couple other products is the usability. The key thing I've always found, and this is something I've researched myself, is the usability in security. There's a program out of Carnegie Mellon called CUPS, the Center for Usability and Privacy and Security, that you look at the different products. Like the whole idea of, you know, when you click on a link and you see it switched over to HTTPS, the idea that a lock pops up to let you know it's secure. There's sometimes not something like that in a lot of these browsers. You just assume that they're using HTTPS. So there's a lot of the user feedback from security professionals all the way down to the general public that needs to be improved across all products, whether it be video conferencing, websites, so forth, so that you know you have that feedback. And as you mentioned, Yael, that they're honest about it. The whole idea that we have stuff like bug bounties and whatnot allows you to take down, and look at what the service says they are versus what they are doing. I think, that sunshine kind of cleanses it all. Yeah, they issued a mea culpa, but they also got serious about it by, hiring folks like Alex Stamos and Katie Masouras and so forth to actually consult on making it better, and then made that purchase of Keybase, which, could potentially give them a leg up on it. But it also, you pop on InfoSec Twitter and everyone just like tipped over the table and said, screw working with Keybase now, because, that was, they're taking something good and potentially ruining it. So you have this interesting balance of things that you have to consider with that. But I think everyone complains about the fact that people dropped in, and you had these Zoom chats where people popped in and were saying profanities and whatnot. But then I think back to chat roulette, and this is just the corporate version of chat roulette at that point. Unless you took the concept of the security seriously, you had to be prepared for what you're going to experience.
Yeah, I mean, to kind of add on to that, I think, people, there's been a lot of haterade on Zoom. I think, we have to give them credit for the fact, that they've basically scaled 10x with the video platform. And that's like no easy feat. I mean, there's a lot of work to be done to get a platform to operate at that scale. There's so many things that can just potentially break. And, I think that they're handling this unprecedented growth, quite well. And I think people are being a little bit harsh. Yes, there's definitely things, they can improve on the security front. But I think, as a company and, their CEO, Eric, I think, they're very high integrity. And I think you have to give them credit for how quickly they're making all these changes. They rolled out Zoom 5.0, they rolled out encryption, they've tried to mitigate Zoom bombing as much as possible. And, they're doing it in timelines of days and weeks, not, months or quarters. If you look at any other organization, what they've accomplished would be so difficult. And, really, I think a lot of the issues that came up were like UI, UX issues, because like so many other people have been using it for use cases that, it really wasn't intended to be used for. And, now that people are using it for school, people are using it for just tons more meetings, governments and all sorts of organizations are using it. They've now realized like, hey, there's some issues that we need to fix. Some of them, maybe they were aware of, and, they could have done better with some of the marketing copy. But, I think they're doing a really good job trying to fix them. And, we're, trusting them with, this conference on its own. And I think many other people are trusting them to board meetings and all sorts of stuff. So I think, we really have to give them a little bit of credit for, how quickly they're turning things around. I do agree that they have like made some missteps, but, they've made a lot of progress, especially with, the acquisition of like Keybase, hiring consultants like Alex Stamos.
Yeah, I think the other thing is to understand your threat model. The idea that Zoom is great for virtual happy hours, but if you're going to have, conduct government business like in the UK, you may want to think about something else. I know that the government here in the US has FedRAMP, goes through this entire process. I know Zoom was cleared, and I got on Twitter and complained about like, well, somebody didn't do their job, kind of actually digging deeper. But, we have multiple governments around the world that have a similar process in place for using services like this in a high security environment. So, they didn't accurately map a threat model to the tools that they're using. So if you are an organization that is using a service like this, and you want to keep something secret, you may need to kind of do an extra level of effort rather than just default for something that's easy to use or everybody can use it on their phone or laptop or whatever. Inconvenience sometimes, unfortunately, is an aspect of increased security.
Exactly. This is one case where I would suggest to everybody, if you don't usually read the release notes that you get when there's an iOS or Android or Windows or Mac update to Zoom, read them, because everyone you can see that they're now placing roadblocks and obstacles that don't optimize for ease of use or virality. I think we can all retire that term from the software business, but instead optimize for security and privacy, even if it means that you can't just share a URL and have anyone just jump on it, because anyone will jump on it. They hadn't, I guess like every social network, they didn't red team the social aspects of it to see What will the really hateful people of Reddit and the 4 and 8chans of the world do with this app when they see it's out there to be made fun of? And I also agree that it speaks well that they've hired people of the caliber of Alex Stamos, who used to be Facebook's chief security officer, Kitty Masuris, who started the bug bounty program for Microsoft and at the Pentagon, Leah Kistner, used to be a privacy advocate at Google. They've brought on board the people I would want to see them bring on board to fix security problems. That said, I think it is about time to get the input of our audience. So how do we bring up the questions here? Let's see.
So if you click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom panel, there's an option there. Yeah, so if you have questions for the panel, you can either ask in the Slack channel, which I'll keep an eye on, and or also straight in here.
Yes, our lines are open, callers.
Yeah. I was going to say, now would be an awesome time to say first-time caller, long-time listener, you know, all of those things.
I also would want to note, you know, mention about bringing folks like Alex and Katie and Leah on. The challenge is that also doesn't scale. There's only a certain amount of security professionals out there that can help. So hopefully there's no more major dumpster fires that we have to deal with. But I think that's an also challenge too, is that as people start to kick the stones, you also don't want to get into groupthink. Like you don't want that entire cadre to move from Zoom to say another vendor or whatever. The diversity of thought is going to be good. And I think that's going to be a challenge as organizations want to step up and do that. You know, finding the right talent to do that kind of consulting is going to be a challenge as well.
So I actually have a question. And this is prompted by the emails that I've received from Duo this morning announcing their IDP. You know, it's really interesting to me to kind of see organizations cross-proliferate. So, I mean, for a long time, Okta was just a cloud directory, and then they also started to do two-factor authentication on their own. Duo was for a long time a 2FA organization. You know, now they have an IDP. How do you see the proliferation of marketplaces affecting, you know, kind of how your analysis works?
Shrav, you want to take a stab at that?
Well, sometimes it's actually kind of a natural evolution for some of these organizations, you know, with Duo or, you know, Okta or any of these, you know, that they'll start with an integration and the next level is just kind of building out feature sets. I know even for my organization, Splunk, you know, everyone considered us like a SIM, but we do a lot more and it's getting that mindset. But it's also part of a lot of those organization strategies to kind of, you know, embrace and extend, I think, to kind of co-opt Microsoft's thing a little bit with Linux. But I think it also shows that there's a strategy of what they want to enhance, where they're going. If you have an organization that, you know, says builds a directory service and then starts building security on top of it, I think that's a natural thing. If you see, you know, somebody who made widget A that helps restaurants suddenly get into national defense, I think that's maybe a little bit of a stretch for them as a product. I've seen that a couple times in IT where, you know, gaming companies suddenly now got into, you know, video conferencing. It's like, while it supports the gaming platform, it's probably not their core competency.
Sure. Shrav?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, with most of these like security companies, their strategy is to, you know, find one product that customers really, really love and then expand from there. So, you know, I don't think that's something that's, you know, I mean, I think that's something that we're just going to see a lot more of. I think one of the big issues with a lot of these security tools is they honestly don't work super well together. And a lot of it is just like setting them up, trying to figure out, you know, how to configure them to play nicely. So, you know, what I've heard from like, especially a lot of smaller IT organizations is that they want like everything under one roof, like everything, you know, provided by one service that integrates very cleanly. And, you know, I think we're seeing companies like Duo and Okta, you know, making those types of offerings now. And, you know, I'm excited to see, you know, where that takes us.
Cool. Thanks. We did have a request from the audience. If folks would, oh, I'm sorry, Amélie, you've already added the link. Thank you so much. And we'll push that out to the Slack channel as well. Do we have other questions from the audience?
That's my phone ringing. That is not an audience question, I don't believe. I'm sure it's a robocall. This is actually a
I was going to say, when are we actually going to see the FCC do
This is
stuff?
actually a vintage trimline phone
Nice.
I got for free at a yard sale, and it actually works too well. In this case, I'm positive that was not a call I wanted to take.
Well, cool. It is about 11:50 at this point, and it's about 10 minutes to the hour. I think we're going to pause things here and say thank you to Rob for being an awesome moderator. Thank you very much to our panelists.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. This was fun.
Glad to be here.
And we'll take our 10-minute break now. We'll be back at the top of the hour. Let me share out our next slide because we've got some really great sessions to come. And oh, it helps if I wait to share my screen until I actually have the PowerPoint up. There we go. So awesome. We have, Joe Peng points out that the cups.cs.cmu.edu website does not automatically redirect to HTTPS. So that's a start.
Yeah, there's a long story about that in academia. I applied to the program there, and I found a vulnerability in the back end that was popping people out of HTTPS to get to one of the registration services. And I submitted that entire investigation as part of my writing sample to the master's program. Suffice it to say, I didn't get in. They don't like vulnerabilities like that being pointed out. So yeah, it's you gotta walk a little carefully there.
Dagger. So yeah, I was gonna say we'll have Scott Ford from Corgi Bytes up at the top of the hour, and then Shrav will be talking about IT stuff with the security frame in mind. So thank you again to our awesome panelists and our great moderators, and we'll take a quick break. We'll be back in 10.
Bye.